Excellent. Well, take it away.
Okay.
I think we're good.
So basically, we can go into all the things, but the other part of doing all the algorithms is the fact that data is being passed around the spacecraft all over the place. And when we started to look at all these separately developed systems, they all had their own interfaces, they all had their own different formats, and they were coming from third-party vendors, science payloads, everywhere. And we're trying to do it in a more centralized and simpler fashion. And so as we started to go with LADI, one of the things that we had started up with is model-based development. And we were using a lot of Simulink, and we were trying to find a good interface between going from Simulink to CFE. And we started to look at the software buses and basically building some very simple tools that would take those messages, which were in buses for Simulink, and that would finally get into the packets that were down on the ITOS. And we built some very simple translation that would handle all of the commands and telemetry that were being passed back and forth. I say mostly because CFS was one of those big holes at that particular time because it was only an assist. We were using ITOS. We had to manually convert that database to insert it in. But once we did that, and the CFS interface doesn't change that much, so we had all of our tools at that particular point. It didn't address a lot of the legacy code that we had to hand code individual things into it, and it also didn't address any of the tables, okay? We had this monstrous Excel spreadsheet that the joke was if this guy ever got hit by a bus, we would be dead in the water. Fortunately, we were able to conduct the whole mission, but he was the only one who could do changes. He was the only one who could generate the code and everything else. There's always seems to be one big monstrous blob that one key person was doing. So that was not a good way for us to do things. And so what we were trying to go forward with is we were trying to morph that current plan into something else. And we came up with SCID, okay? And this was system configuration for information and mission information. It was really to try to deal with a more holistic view, to get rid of these ugly spreadsheets, to be able to deal with all the tables. And it was we were trying to leverage some existing work that KSC had done. It seems like everybody has done this problem, okay? Every center has tried to take a look at this, and we've all come up with our own solutions. And so we tried to leverage this as much as possible, and everyone calls it something a little bit different. And so what we ended up doing is creating this relational database based off of Django, which we were really liking. It was built for this kind of informational flow. It was built for it, and it primarily used YAML. That's what Django kind of interfaces. It's, to me, all these are just simply instantiations of a database, and there's translation tools for all of it. The biggest issue that we had was that we didn't have any direct funding for this. This was all mission-specific developed code. And it's really kind of, as lessons learned, I think that the CFS community has looked at tools as they go forward and thinking that you want to be able to take a tool that you think one mission could use for other missions and be able to have that funded and being able to pull it out. And we never were really able to fully do that. So that was and so this was a little bit of the data flow. And I'll go to the next slide. And you'll see that this was, we had already looked at the CCDD slide. I have that one coming up. And you can see that it basically has the relational database at the center of it. And all of the data products flow in and out of that. It was all Python, Django driven. We didn't have to, all these were just simply translators that would translate either into the database or out of the database. So it made these tools and interfaces very simple for us to go ahead and expand. So we were adding XML, XDCE, we had a translator at one point. That one we didn't have a lot of products in and out of it, so we didn't really maintain it. But we were looking for all the ground-based products. This also interfaced to all of our C files, to Simulink, and to all of our other, creating other documentation as we needed it. So
So it's an input to MATLAB as opposed,
it's both.
it's, okay.
It's actually both. It'll intake MATLAB Simulink buses, and then it'll output it also. So it'll do any of these kinds of formats of things. But so then we were told about CCDD, and we were really looking at this. And there's a couple of things that were happening to us internally that really make us try to do this. We were primarily looking at for the Resource Prospector mission, which was another mission between AIMS, JSC, and KSC. And we were really looking at this, and there's a lot of similarities between the two. I think overall, if you stand back, they're trying to get the same thing accomplished. Again, this is another one of these where this is a common problem that really needs to be done. And again, they went ahead and did this. This was I think we've already talked about CCDD. One of the things probably the two things that stand out is that this was built, at least from our perspective, it may not have been initially, but at least from our perspective, it was built to be project agnostic. It was built to build, it was built to be, not to be sort of as, take it from one project, morphing it into the next project and go forward. It was trying to stand back a little bit and building a project agnostic tool. And the other part of it is that it was extremely well documented. You know, we have one of our engineers who were going through it and was trying to look at this. And so these were two very strong attributes that as we were looking at this. And again, this was the same sort of slide. It has the database in the center with all these kind of tools that kind of spin off of it at that particular point. So what do we do? So we have just lost, we have just lost some very key people who were in support of this. And so we were always struggling to maintain and to keep up with these tools. And so what we really tried to do, where we are right now, is we're trying some test implementations with CCDD, taking our current databases and trying to go ahead and do this. One of the needed additions that we needed was a script for translating to Simulink. And that actually, we've been interfacing actually with one of our other, with JSC right now, and we already have that translator. That script was very straightforward. One of the questions I would have is that from a CCDD standpoint, where do we go with these scripts? Where do we go with these tools? It would be in everyone's best interest to be able to go ahead and release these. We have no real desire to keep a hold of them. But we're looking at, you know, each of these individual things as we go ahead and try to do it. But we do see the long-term kind of prospect of this. Unless we have the funding to maintain these tools, it really makes, this is another one of these, it makes sense for us to not duplicate these projects over and over again. And if somebody else has taken it and moved forward, it would make the most benefit for us to go ahead and try to leverage these tools. There's some other additional products that we need to do as we're moving forward with it, but at least as we go through our initial instantiation, everything is looking very, very good. And so this was some of the things that we had to do in order to implement CCDD with RP. Every mission has a slightly different approach. We had to do, you know, do some customizations always, and you're always kind of arguing whether or not, you know, how is there a way to modify the tool to be more flexible and less doing. We had to. We've had to do some modifications to the infrastructure. Most of this has been just a matter of we didn't think of this, and there's been a constant email exchange, and it's been very responsive. And most of the time what he said is that he goes ahead and says, well, what about this, what about that? And the next morning he says, just go ahead and upload it, and it's done. So it's been very quick, it's been very responsive for doing all of this.
So I have people like that on my project.
Yeah, so it's been moving very well at this particular point. So most of the things are very minor changes, very minor tweaks, and we can do the changes, or like I said, it's better for us to try to enhance the tools so that it works well for everybody at that particular point. And most, again, these are some of the tweaks that we've had to do with some of the scripts. Some of the production scripts, that produce some of the products, we do it in slightly a different way, and that's another one of those. With all these tools, at some point you have to say, what is mission specific versus what is a sort of a general way of abstracting this that will make it more flexible. In summary, this is a common problem that has to occur to everything. I think the tools are great that are coming out right now, and that these are two, these database tools are really the way to go when you're trying to manage multiple different consumers and multiple different users at that particular point. And we just are, like I said, for right now, it seems like we're moving towards a direction of using more of these open source tools and probably maintaining less of these in the future. So, yes.
What database do you use behind with Django? Is it Postgres also? Or?
So that's one of the big things that I liked about Django. Django's completely database agnostic. We've used MySQL, SQLite, or Postgres SQL, depending on the solution. And it's one of the things I have later on, but it's one of the things we really liked about Django. It had also a lot of built-in database tools. But it truly, we've used all three of those. We tend not to like Postgres because it tends to be a bit larger. I mean, it's more true to the standard, but it tends to be larger. So.
Yeah, I know Django. It seems to make a lot of sense to use that for data management, like you're saying.
Yeah.
Would it be possible to use both tools in tandem around the same database?
Yes. Yes, you could definitely hook in Django tools to interface with Postgres out of all of this. And that's one of the things that we were looking at. The issue is that there's still a fair amount of code that you have to go ahead and implement with this. And what we're trying to do is maintain the smallest amount of code as we move forward. And then also as we do the tools, if we do create new code, new scripts, be able to figure out how to add those tools back in, so that again, all of the maintenance of tools by itself is an effort. And so that's what we were trying to figure out how to avoid. It's the other aspect of it is that it looked like Simulink was one of those that was being used by other places, and we just felt like that would be a useful tool to try to add back.
But it seems like it would lend itself well if you create your database. If both share the same database, create the database, and then it'd be tool agnostic. You could, with the mission, you would come with the database, and then you could use either the CCD tool, CCDD, or your tool.
I mean, that's fundamentally the strength of the database, is that it makes it completely agnostic to what the users are. You just simply have to build the translation tools to get the data either into the database or out of the database. So yes, you're absolutely right. You could use any tool that you wanted to, as long as the it becomes more with the schema, with the overall layout of the database is really where the thought needs to go at that particular point for each of these different kinds of uses. So, but yes, you could use any tools, and theoretically you can translate one database into another. Okay, I mean that was we were using YAML primarily as our interface, because that was what Django's natural thing. But you could dump I mean, that's how we did. One of the things that we had to do is to keep track of how do you do version control of each of the databases as you move forward. And so one of the things that we do is we dump it out to some kind of ASCII file and then check that in and then keep track of it. I mean, it's not done that often, and it's mostly for backup purposes, but you can dump it and bring it into another kind of database. So all of these become fairly data agnostic if you really wanted to. And it becomes just a matter of what the translation tools are that you need to do.
One last one on that last thing you said. So for version control,
Yeah, like I said, we really like the Django, a lot of the tools that were built into it. It's one of the things that if we move away, to CCDD, we'll miss, is some of those nice tools that existed. Because they were built for these kind of maintenance and things like that. Where if you deal with the full Java interface, it's not that it can't be done, it's that you have to do it. It's not already part of the tool chain. And again, it goes back to what you're trying to deal with. But we haven't, like I said, we've just started down the path of doing it, and there might be some very simple ways of dealing with this when we start looking at it. So, but it's clear to us that as we move forward, unless somebody has a lot of hidden money that they're willing to give us, we probably are going to be looking at trying to leverage some of these tools that are really doing, or have better support and doing probably a better job overall with all of the things that we're trying to get accomplished.
Just a couple comments. I guess you're right. It's not only center to center that keeps redoing things, it's project to project
Yes.
too.
Yep.
So, once I see the commonality across, multiple projects need the same thing, we took a step back, kind of in the spirit of CFS, and say, what can we do as a common denominator to make this general, but yet extensible? And I think the whole scripting thing into the database kind of probably answers that. And I love the idea that you're adding the MATLAB Simulink stuff. So we just have to figure out how to get that back to Kevin, who's maintaining it actively, and we'll
Yeah.
maybe get that back on GitHub.
Yeah, right now, Kevin and Matt Knudsen is doing this work, so probably it's just a matter of, as we do changes, trying to make sure that some of these things get back and forth.
Excellent.
So, yeah, the other aspect, and I think I was talking a little bit during his presentation, is that we would like to see expansion to other kinds, not just CFS,
Right.
but there's like with,
What?
well, there are other ones in this world, so. but-
Yeah, I think when we market it, we say it can be a general purpose tool.
Yeah, right. And
But there are some things like when it generates the header files, or it can do the scheduler table. Those are like add-ons that are really specifically, towards CFS. It's just you wouldn't use those features, I guess, is the thing. And back to the question of multiple databases, I disagree that multiple databases should have visibility, or at least read-write visibility into the same database, because this tool and any other like it maintains the integrity of the data so that there is no conflicts. Everything, that when you get data out of it, it's right. That it's coherent. So if you have multiple writers, you don't necessarily trust multiple writers. So we've had this in the SysML world, where we have to actually decide who's in charge of what data, who's the authoritative source. And if you're the source, everybody else can read it, but only you can write it.
Yeah.
So, you kind of have to make a differentiation on what parts of the database, maybe you can subdivide the database. Let's say if you want to use a SysML tool to define higher level aspects of the system, you can do that. But then the CCDD is really the source for the flight data. So we've struggled with defining that, and like our web-based interface, well, why don't you just let people write in there? Well, no.
You want something that can just simply query, and that's it.
Yeah, yeah, and otherwise you can't maintain the integrity of the schema. I don't know, it's just, I thought.
So
That's what we ran into.
One question I do have, speaking of SysML, that was one of these other questions that I know that there's a big push, and to me this is a natural interface between SysML and the flight software community.
Yeah, so where we kind of drew the line when we were talking about this is you still model your whole system in SysML, but when it gets down to the messages or the data that goes over the software bus, that data comes from this database, and it's essentially read into the model. So
So you
I mean-
have been working on that?
yeah. Well, yeah, we have it for Magic Draw, I think.
Actually, I got one comment too. So Goddard, I mean, we also have 3 apps
that we released as open source, but we didn't have a tool. So we used to have so the limit checker, stored command, and data storage. I think I got the 3. So they all we had a tool that was, again, right, based on the assist data output, and you could input, and it was a web-based tool, but we never re-hosted it or made it available. There's multiple, just want to kind of let everybody know, there are some efforts to make command line tools that generate those tables, but this might be a common solution as well if it's made available, just like you did for the scheduler table.
Yeah, it's all done in command, yeah.
But I guess my point is, just like the scheduler table, we could add capabilities probably to generate the limit check or the other ones. I mean, it just,
I guess that's one thing, I didn't really go through the tool, for us, for the tool chain, it's the same with, as we go with CCDD, it's, you have to somehow populate the database, and that can be done any number of ways, but once the database has been populated, it goes into the regular build tools, like Bamboo or whatever else, and it just.
and you just use a command line.
You just use a command line or whatever, you turn the crank and out comes software.
Hi, Gary Smith. I worked on some of the CFS user guides when I first came to Goddard, and it occurred to me that you could extend this to pump out the fields that would be needed to customize a user guide so that all of the mnemonics would be specific to a particular mission. Does that,
One of our products that we had for Skimmy, it's one of the things we would like to, we haven't fully implemented, I don't know if it exists for CCDD, is HTML user guides. So it would list out all the commands, it would list out, and it was just simply scraping partially from the data itself and partially from the C files itself, but it could go ahead and create all the user guides. It makes it very nice because, again, the code itself is the documentation and makes it very, very straightforward. But all of these are, to me, once you have getting the database, getting that in place is the key part of that. And then
Right.
adding the additional tools to get things in and out becomes fairly straightforward. So, but yeah.
thanks.
Sorry, you're not gonna sit down. Yeah.
I've been seeing too long.
Hi, I feel at times you guys are talking amongst yourself, your little inner circle of NASA.
Oh.
And so you have these lovely tools that are hidden behind that locked door.
CCDD is fully
No,
open
CCDD.
source.
Yep.
Okay. And what
Yeah.
about the other one?
The other one is not. So that was, what had happened was, there was an internal conversation probably within NASA, and we had all sort of talked about, we've created this tool within. And so there were some questions that were saying, what is this? We've heard rumors of this. The Skimmy was a tool that Ames developed really for Ames missions. And we were looking at trying to open source this. We didn't have any direct funding to do that. And so what happened was JSC did have funding and saw a need, because there is a definite need, and went ahead and developed this tool. This tool right now, there was the previous presentation was regarding CCDD, but right now it's on GitHub. Anybody can download it. I've got to say, the documentation is very good. It's extensive, it has lots of stuff, and they've also been very helpful on, if there are any questions, they'll definitely point them out.
Great, thank you.
Anything else? Thanks, Greg.